I want to welcome to the program somebody, actually, the distinction of being one of the few journalists who are always welcome here on the Ruthless Variety program. Salena, Zito, how are you?
Living the dream. How about you?
We're great. We're great. You're a highly sought after commodity. The Minions really wanted to have you on here.
Well, that's an honor. I love the Minions. I'm a
They love you and they love you. But you know what? They have plenty of places to keep up with you at, Salena, because I feel like you have more columns than anybody.
I write a lot. So yeah. Okay, so I'm a daily political cultural reporter for the Washington Examiner. I'm a weekly columnist for the New York Post, and I'm also a weekly columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I title all of my columns are called Middle of Somewhere, because I do not believe that anywhere in this country, in my estimation, is the middle of nowhere. And that's traditionally where I'm reporting from, places that people usually don't go, places that have, for lack of a better term, news deserts. So I try to sort of get in there, hang out, figure out what's going on, get to know the people, and write the stories. That's what's going on in these areas.
So you've always been an incredibly accomplished journalist and understood innately the sources that you're covering and the tenor of campaigns. And part of that is what you just suggested, and that you get to know the people and you actually understand how people and why people are casting their ballots. But it's particularly the case when we've seen the migration of corporate media away from middle America, right? Where there has been such an emphasis on groupthink that is sort of hosted in New York and DC and LA, where they just don't understand people. And that's where you live and have lived your entire career.
Right. I live in what I fondly call the Paris of Appalachia, the biggest city in Appalachia, Pittsburgh. I actually moved outside of Pittsburgh, but I'm still in the area. So here's the problem, and Brad Todd and I wrote about this in our book, an entire chapter about this in our book, The Great Revolt, in that the problem in today's newsrooms is the same problem that is in corporations and academia and institutions, and I would argue within even our political parties, whether it's the Democrat or Republican Party, is that the people that work in the boardrooms, in the newsrooms, and make the big decisions have very little in common with the people they serve, or the people who sit in their seats, or the people that buy their products. And that is what was part of, I hate the word trigger because it's like such a psychobabble word. However, it's appropriate here. That's sort of what triggered this conservative populist coalition that I argue began in 2006 when Republicans lost all those seats. So the newsrooms, we were talking about newsrooms. The newsrooms today, it's not that these reporters are bad people or the people in boardrooms are bad people. It's just that they don't know anybody like me, right? Their worldview is shaped by their neighbors and the people that live in their neighborhoods and in or the same county as them. So and when a news story comes through a newsroom that's about guns or that's about the life issue, there are very few people in a newsroom that own a gun, know how to use a gun, and or have ever sat in a church pew on Sunday. So faith is a very foreign ideal to them. When you put people like that together and they're concentrated in these large newsrooms, right? And they all live in these super zip codes and all went to the same kind of schools. When they go to cover someone like me or my neighbor, they're odd, because they don't have any shared values. And the same problem has been happening in corporations. All that pressure is what helped form. It wasn't just politics that formed the conservative populist coalition. It was the pressure coming from what Brad and I called our cultural curators. Here's a really, and we see, I want to get back to this in a minute, because we see that starting to crack. We see disruptors in the system with Joe Rogan, with Elon Musk, even with Tom Cruise in Maverick. Go see Maverick. You walk in there and you're like, why hasn't anybody been entertaining me like this for the past 10 years?
No kidding.
Love it. I want to hug everybody in this room.
Yeah.
But I'm nobody's lecturing me. So we saw this. I think this is like the clearest example of what I mean by cultural curators. So in 2016, when Colin Kaepernick made a decision to kneel during the national anthem as opposed to stand for it, think about where the NFL's headquarters are.
Yep.
They're not just in New York City, they're on Park Avenue in New York City, right? What does anyone in that boardroom have in common with the guy who sets aside a third of his salary every year to pay for his season tickets, who built a man cave out of old wood and painted it black and gold or whatever your team is, and paints his face every Sunday or Thursday or Monday? I mean, now they're every day of the week, right?
Right.
But what does he have in common with them? Nothing. He's probably never those board members have never tailgated with someone like that. I would argue the NFL would be better suited to have their boardroom in Canton, Ohio, and have a couple guys and gals who went to a state school that live in Canton and have real life experiences. Because what they would have done is said, Mr. Kaepernick, totally respect what you're doing. However, in your contract on page 9, you signed right there. See, your signature is right here. And you said you would stand for the national anthem. We can debate it next year when you have a new contract, but you got to live up to your contract. Because people who live in Canton or Pittsburgh or wherever, we have to play by the rules all the time. And that's where I think it wasn't about police. It wasn't about race. It was about, we follow the rules all the time. Why is there special privileges for other people?
Yeah. No, I mean, it really has boiled down to that. And getting back to the newsroom phenomenon. I mean, look, we used to just, back when there was 3 networks and maybe a couple of cables, and you had your daily, obviously the Washington Post, New York Times, AP, but then local dailies. Like local dailies figured out how to deal with some of that, right? But then over time, we've seen this more concentrated. And we used to think, what do we call it? Like the Beltway phenomenon. It's like inside, I've gone Beltway, right? And it was all about politicians that were elected that chose to live inside the confines of Washington, D.C. and its culture, that over time lost touch with their constituency, because that's a human phenomenon. If you're only surrounded by one kind of thinking, you just become that, right? And that, I guess that is what is this what we're seeing in journalism.
Absolutely. They don't have, and the problem is they all live same area, went to the same school, socialized together, go to the same cocktail parties, whatever. What also happened at the same time is you saw a collapse of hundreds of small newspapers. So people were forced to get their news from a national news organization, and as opposed to the community bulletin, which they got every day and it came at their doorstep at 6:00, and the news was filled with all kinds of things, and it was news, it was not opinion. And then now they're sort of forced into these national networks, whether it's cable and or the New York Times or Washington Post. They're funneled into these places where these reporters don't have any connection to the people that are reading them. And so again, it's not that journalists are bad. They just don't know who they're covering. I can remember,
and to be clear, some of them are bad. some of them choose to be bad. But your point is well taken, in that it's almost as if now that we've gone through this awakening within the conservative movement, where you understand information flow and where it's coming, and it inherently doesn't have your interests or your community at heart. How much are you nervous about journalism itself becoming a self-selecting profession? In other words, if you're a liberal, you're a progressive, you're more interested in becoming a journalist than you are if you're a conservative or an independent.
Right. That's the challenge. I don't know how we overcome that challenge. We're in a real bender right now. And I don't see anybody bringing the wagon to take us out of it. Right. And the solution is very hard, because the solution is to go back to news organizations, small newspapers where you can get just the information and you have a more balanced look at the world. Because most local newspapers, I mean, I worked for a local newspaper for the first 2 decades of my career. You were part of that community. You were not only a journalist, but when you ran to the fire, when you ran to the crime scene, you lived in that neighborhood. So you were very cognizant and careful about how you reported something, because everybody around you was part of your community. There's not that same pressure at the Washington Post or the New York Times when they are covering something that is in the middle of somewheres across.
Yeah, well, and to the contrary, right? I mean, even people who come from communities like that are very quickly sort of indoctrinated into a groupthink by assignment editors, or like, this is the thing that you need to be looking. People of authority are attempting to tell them what is important to care about. And when you're a young professional, I don't care if you're in journalism or anything else, you listen to your boss, right?
Right. And I think the other problem is I left Twitter. People that hate me will think I left for one reason. I actually left because I didn't like how we treated each other. It really bothered me. And second of all, it didn't make me a better journalist. It was a time suck, and it didn't make me a better journalist. But, to me, and that to my latter point, Twitter has almost become the assignment editor for journalists today. And they look at it as this great big pool of ideas and controversies to pick and choose from. And they believe that is how everyone feels, or everyone sees the world, or this is what's happening everywhere. And that's quite the contrary. Pew has a great study out about exactly how many people that are on Twitter compared to how many people are actually in this country. And also the demographics. It's not just left leaning, like there's not even normal Democrats on Twitter. It is the left to the left of a normal, like Twitter's not representative of my neighbors that are all Democrats, right? Like, not at all. They would look at that and say, did they land here from a different planet? Because I don't think that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I cover things, even in the most liberal or most urban areas, when they're talking about the things that concern them, they don't use words like social justice. They don't use words like climate change. They talk about things in a tangible way, in the way that affects them. Like, my water is bad here. Right? Like, not me, but like, that's a problem in my community. Our water is, has too much lead, or whatever the case may be. They don't say there's climate change in my,
yeah, right.
People don't talk that way. But if you want Twitter, and you're a journalist, you think everybody talks about social justice and climate change. Not really. Like, if you spend the time listening, not really. One of the times, I didn't really notice this until 2016 or 15, 16, and I'm out covering the Trump rallies. And my modus of operation was, people should know I don't fly. I don't take interstates or turnpikes. I only take the back roads. And I also only stay in bed and breakfasts, so that the first person I meet in a town is the small business person who usually knows where all the bodies are buried, right? They know all the gossip. Yeah. But I would go into a town, let's say Ashtabula, Ohio, right? I get there 3 days ahead of time, and I'd kind of like blend in with the community, figure out what's going on, figure out what the problems are, sit and just listen to people, just taking it in. And then I would go to a Trump rally, but I would go like 7 hours early. And there would be a line a mile long, but it would be like families and grandparents and hibachis and folding chairs and beach balls. And I remember the first time I went, I was like, wait, I thought these things were violent, right?
Right.
And then, we were all put in this sort of platform area. And I would be there. And then what I would call the celebrity journalist would come on a bus. They had flown in to the airport. They stopped and got their coffee at the hotel. And then they all got on a bus and they drove in. And they usually drove in on a highway. They didn't see any of the things that were going on in that town, good or bad. And we would all sit beside each other. And as a journalist, your instinct is to look at the shiny thing, right? The thing that's different. So of course they paid attention and zoomed in on the 7 completely strange people at the event, right? And right. You could clockwork. You could look across the cable news screen, and every one of them had all the 7 strange people being interviewed, right? And they would pull like 5 clips from Trump where he said the most outrageous thing, which was not hard to do. However, they missed the 25,000 other people. They missed that the stereotype that they created in their mind of who they thought the Trump voter was actually not the shiny object. It was the 25,000 other people. It was the doctors. It was the lawyers. It was the mothers. It was the fathers. It was the grandparents. It was the young people. It was a coalition. And you can't win an election without a coalition. But they missed that coalition because they focused on the shiny object. Why did they focus on the shiny object? Because they didn't get there for a couple of days and get to know what was really going on and find out what average was in that town.
That's just so fascinating. In retrospect, entirely true. But it continues to this date, right? So if we move to current, and you got an up close and personal look at this with the Pennsylvania Senate race, right? How the national media characterized what was going on, and basically all Republican primaries about what matters is entirely different from when you talk to people on the ground about what they're voting for, what they're voting against, right? I mean, everything is through a prism of Trump because that's the national media's understanding of a conservative electorate, right? It's not about actually understanding anything.
No, and that's a really important point that you bring up. Well, yeah, I've been down in Georgia covering that primary for a year. And last year at this time, when everything sort of fell apart for Kemp, in the minds of the media, Trump was mad at him. The All-Star game pulled out, Coca-Cola, Delta, right? He was getting if you're looking at it from 30,000 feet, you're thinking, no, this guy is John. And everything, to your point, everything is gone through the prism of Trump. However, that is not true with voters if you listen to them. I went down there right after that and interviewed him, and I talked to people, and they're like, we like Kemp. He gets things done. And he was right to oftentimes you heard, I like Trump. However, I'm not stuck in 2020. Yeah. And this was the real nuance that people really missed about this race. There were a lot of people that were very embarrassed that they didn't show up for the runoff. There are a lot of people that were very embarrassed that they listened to Trump and they feel as though they had egg on their face because to them, they thought, my God, there's a Democrat majority in the Senate because I listened and I shouldn't have. I should have done my duty and shown up. So that nuance that was really important. And so, when I was down there in January, I came home like, this guy's going to win it by like a huge amount. But that's because I went around and listened to people. I asked questions. I let them talk about things. And you start to put that puzzle together, all of a sudden you're understanding what the story really is, as opposed to what they want the story to be. Every single story about Republican has the word Trump in it. Yeah. And the thing that really aggravates me, because I I live in the middle of what you would call Trump country, is Trump voters are complicated, and nuance still exists in America, and so does context. And they can still like his policies, sometimes like his personality, and still not want him to run.
Interesting.
Also,
Yeah.
they can also like him, like his policies, want him to run, and not be real happy with the person he backed for in a primary. Like,
Right.
people are complicated. They don't fit in these silos that my profession like to create.
They do. Yeah. They only fit in those silos when you're covering them like they're zoo animals, right?
Right.
Where it's like, oh, they're a panda, or they're a polar bear. Right. But like, they're not all the same polar bear here.
That's and that's so true. I've been covering the Latino vote for extensively for the past 6 or 7 years, right? And I started to notice when I first started covering them, in a meaningful way, is that they don't think of themselves as the Latino vote. They think of themselves as an American vote. And they vote for the same reasons you and I vote: community, family, what's going to help my business. A lot of Latino voters own small businesses, and what's going to benefit me. They don't vote any other way, and they get insulted when you insinuate they're voting because of their the color of their skin. And or their heritage. In fact, Latino voters remind me very much. I'm first generation Italian American, and they remind me very, very much of my Italian immigrant grandparents, and how they settled in this country, assimilated, and then created family. Which, by the way, everybody lives next door to each other. That's like not just a Hispanic thing, that's an Italian thing. That's just what we do, right? It just reminds me so much of how the immigrants from the 20th century, the immigrants from the 21st century do not behave any differently, and they're like insulted that the press, in particular the Democrats, categorize them and separate them just because of their heritage.
Yeah, well, you're seeing the rubber meet the road there, right? I mean, there's been a huge sea change with Hispanic voters supporting Republicans. We saw it in Texas, but you're getting it basically in every community across the country at this point. I want to get your sort of looking glass forward here. And how do you think this settles out in the midterm, and what kind of shape do you think the conservative movement finds itself in going into another presidential election in 2024?
Well, I think despite themselves, the Republicans are going to have a monstrous night in November. They will trip up. Part of that is because there's not one singular leader, but that's also a benefit to them, I think, because the conservatives need to iron out who they are. I think what you will see, the Republican coalition is remarkably different than the Republican coalition of 2006 when I first started covering this. I remember covering Sarah Palin, and she was like the only Republican that won in 2006 for governor. And I'm like, that's next. That's where they're going. But the conservative populist coalition is a really interesting coalition, because the conservatives have now inherited the working class voter, and it's not just white. It is also Black. It is also Latino. It is also female. So that stereotype of working class white male, the bitter Bible clinger, right? The deplorable. That working class voter has broadened. You are also seeing suburban voters come back home. They stepped away in 2018. They stepped back a little in 2020. Joe Biden did not win by much. And just like Donald Trump didn't win by much in 2016 either. But what was remarkable is how he flipped counties. But but in this coalition are also suburban educated women. I mean, these are people that are always coming back. And while the gun issue is hot right now, I don't think that the Democrats fully understand how much who the gun owner in America has changed. Mm-hmm. We have sold more guns since 2020 than we have ever sold in history. And the new gun owners are majority female and then majority Black. So the gun ownership, the base of the gun owner is going to be part of that coalition. It just depends on how well I don't even think how well the Republicans navigate the next couple of weeks. I think is how dumb Democrats are in the next couple of weeks. I mean, they're losing this election. It's not that Republicans are necessarily winning it. They have caused their own problems. And I hear this so often from Democrats who are so fed up. They're like, it didn't have to be this way, but I'm out.
Yeah.
So I think the Republicans are going to have an amazing November. They're going to win seats that they have no business winning. What they do afterwards and will be interesting, because what you'll see beginning of January next year is people are going to start putting it out there that they're running.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
if you, I don't know if you subscribe to my view on this, but there's no lack of ambition in the Republican Party, right? If you're talking about the national media kaleidoscope of how they view all of this, it's basically like Trump and Trump alone or a wide open field. That's not my take at all. I think this is a wide open field no matter what.
Yes, 100% agree. And that's not my opinion. That is the opinion of the people that I interview. And as I said, I am out here, everywhere that I travel. I don't even know how many miles I put on my car this year alone, which, by the way, is very expensive right now.
Yes.
But
thanks, Joe Biden.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so many Let's Go Brandon out here in the real world. And there's so many, like every time I pull up to the gas station, there's a sticker that's either brand new or one that's half peeled off that the gas station attendant did that said, I did that. And it's Joe Biden pointing at the price.
It's everywhere. But listen, hold on. I got to get you 3 questions that we have for everyone. I know you listen to the program, so you know what's coming. But I also want to say, everybody's got to read your stuff. You can find her at the Washington Examiner. You can find her at the New York Post. You can find her at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, basically anywhere. It's really smart stuff, as we just talked about, because she gets to know the people who are making these decisions in a democracy that sort of matters, right?
They can go to SalenaZito.com. They can sign.
There you go.
Everything's located there, and my emails are free, fun, and they're not fattening.
Wonderful. Healthy too. Okay. All right. So first question on the unhealthy side, which I know as a first generation Italian that you're going to have a good answer to this. Your last meal on earth, what would it be?
Oh, it would be ricotta balls.
There you go.
Some braciole and a little pasta with a little sauce on the side.
Perfect.
I mean, it's very specific, and that's what it's going to be.
That's what we look for here on the Variety Program. Yeah. Specificity. Okay. All right. So my second question, if you never got into this line of work, if you were never a journalist at the intersection of politics and culture, and you had this blue sky availability to do anything you wanted with your life, what would it be?
I would have probably loved to have been an art teacher.
Oh,
I love teaching. So I've taught at Harvard, I've taught at Washington and Lee, I've taught at Pitt, and Hillsdale. I love teaching, but I also love art. So maybe I was an art history minor in school. So I would probably combine those two.
So you're the successful one with an art history degree. We've been in constant quest for that.
I know a lot of useless information about the history of art, and what can be really helpful in maybe like a specific Trivial Pursuit game, but outside of that, not really.
I love it. I love it. Okay. The last question, and you know it's coming. We view everyone, every successful person through a prism of whether you're motivated by the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat, but nobody likes losing and nobody hates winning. It's about what motivates you to get there. It's either the glass half full optimist, sort of charging up the hill to the next endeavor, or the person whose every success they've enjoyed for about 2 seconds, but every setback they take with them and vow and work that much harder to try to overcome in the future. Salena Zito, where do you find yourself?
I'm an optimist. And this will shock people. I've never been super ambitious, mainly because in the center of my life is my family, my children, but also my grandchildren. And so the opportunities that I've earned have not been because I've pursued them, but because people have come to me. And I think that has a lot to do with my attitude. But if I have any really great attribute outside of cooking and hugging my grandchildren, it would be trying to find the most positive aspect of something and work towards that.
I love it. In a classic sort of Midwestern way too. Fantastic. Salena Zito, listen, I've enjoyed this a lot. I know we've got a ton out of it. I want you to stay in touch because there's nobody I know who spends more time with actual voters than Salena Zito. And so you got to keep us updated as we go along in this midterm.
Yeah, you know what? Thanks for having me. I was like a little excited to do this because I'm fangirling. I'm fangirling here. One more shameless plug. Please go to SalenaZito.com. I promise you it'll be fun. It'll be a fun ride across the country.
Salena Zito, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.